So we're getting ready to put together the pump half of the pump assembly and have brand new slide, brand new O-ring, and little ring that goes on the back side of the slide. New rotor, snowflake, brand new vanes, hardened pump rings from Transgo, and their special spring that goes with the hardened vanes. And this is for the high RPM version. So these pump rings and the spring are for RPMs in excess of 5,600, and this is where this engine is going to be at. New pivot pin, and the spring was perfectly fine, but it's all cleaned up. So this is all going to go together in just a few minutes, and then we'll take a quick little vid of that and then move on to the stator half of the pump. So the O-ring is installed in the back side of the slide and the new spacer. The spring was dropped in, and then the rotor slid over a bit. The green Teflon pad was put in and the rubber seal behind the Teflon pad. And then the rotor was pushed, or the slide was pushed this way. And then once it's pushed this way and the little green Teflon pad goes in this little receiver, then you can drop the pivot pin in. And then once you get the pivot pin in, then you can put the spring in. And this is a Transgo spring for this kit. Extremely stiff. It takes a little bit of effort, but basically you just put the spring on the pad there, keep your hand over it, protecting yourself from the spring flying, and then push in this spring and just get it on top of the aluminum portion of it, and very carefully work it in without galling and making a bunch of metal and all sorts of debris. But like I say, it just slid right in, and then I'd go basically a little less than 1/8 of an inch below the register here, and just about 1/8 of an inch or less than 1/8 of an inch below the register here, and we're good to go on that. So now I'm going to start putting in the hardened pump rings. So you start with the hardened pump ring first, and then you start with, or the next you go with the snowflake. And then so then that goes on next. And in the previous video, when I set the bush in, I made sure that it was away from the top of the snowflake so they're not touching each other. And then you go with another hardened ring, and then you start loading in the paddles. And by the way, everything was thoroughly cleaned, washed with solvent, and blown off with air before everything went together. So there was no packing debris, cardboard box material, dust, dirt, whatever. I'll come back to that one in just a minute. She'll drop down once I feed in the other ones. Or once again, when it's filming, that's when things don't want to slide in and drop in like they should. And this is a 13 vane pump, by the way. There they go. And they're all down. So this portion is all done and ready to then rebuild the stator half of the pump and then marry them together. Putting in the extra wide input bushing. And just take it just a tiny bit below chamfer. Should be right about there. Now sometimes the bushing driver will come out easy, and other times it won't. So if it doesn't, I've got a tool then to go through the backside and gently knock it out. But yeah, she'll come out. But what happens is the bushing as you're driving it in, this will size the inside diameter of it, so it's just a tight fit. So anyways, we'll get her out and it'll be undamaged. So we got the bushing all driven in, got the bushing driver out like I said we would. No damage to the bushing whatsoever. It's perfectly sized. I had to take my special little tool from the back side and very, very carefully, this was stuck in the bore, and then this goes in the back side of it, and tap, 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 out it comes. So it's perfectly sized, and she slips on nice and easy, no binding, and she's a nice wide bronze bushing instead of the narrow GM aluminum bushing. So it'll cover the entire surface area of this bore, and it'll give this area of the input shaft, you can see where the old one rode from there to there. It was a really narrow GM aluminum bushing, and now this new one will go all the way clear up, so it'll be from there to here, and it'll make this input shaft way more stable. And then on the back side of the stator, instead of putting just a OEM type bronze bushing, which these ones are, I like these all the time, but I'm going to be putting in a Sonics coated rear stator bushing, and it's just a tiny, tiny bit, not much, but it's just a tiny bit wider than this OEM type bushing. But these are great because they actually provide quite a bit of lubricity for the back half of that input shaft, right where it supports near the back bushing, I'm sorry, the back bearing in the forward drum. So anyways, we'll continue on. So we're putting in the Sonics coated bushing. You can see the word Sonics right there. And we're gonna get it set to the proper depth, which is just a little bit before the 45-degree chamfer at the top. Right there, looks about good. Blow it off with air. And clean her up. So she's blown off and she's driven in and set right below the 45-degree chamfer at the top. And so she's good to go. So got the filter seal installed. And the best way of putting these in is not with just a hammer, but with a bushing driver flipped upside down, and you put the seal, the metal body of the seal, in the bore, and you take your seal or your bushing driver upside down and set it on top and tap, 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 tap until she bottoms out on the housing. You hear that metal sound, and you are then in nice and flush. And it's easy to do this now than if you forget and have the transmission all built and you're getting ready to put the filter on after the valve body's done and you're like, oh shoot, I forgot to put the seal in. It is extremely difficult. It has been done, but it's easier to do it now than later. Okay, so we have the stator half of the pump mounted in the vise with a protective little rag to keep it from damaging the surface of the machine part of the pump. We've got the regulator valve itself from Transgo installed with the seat. You can probably see it inside there. Look inside that opening. Has the new little seat on it. And going to be putting in the pressure regulator spring and the bumper spring. And then installing the Transgo. It's over here on the bench. Transgo 500 boost valve. And I've got a little bit of assembly gel to keep the valve from sliding out. And the new snap ring. And so that'll be going in here in just a few minutes. Okay, so we're getting ready to put quite a few of the little components into the stator half of the pump. And this is an updated Transgo regulator valve. This valve will supply constant feed of lubricating oil to the torque converter. And it actually has wider lands than normal, than an OEM valve. And then this little spool here that normally cuts off the two chambers for the converter feed is actually ground down from Transgo. So the converter is constantly getting a full charge of cooler ATF going to the torque converter, returning from the cooler inside the radiator. This is the Transco updated boost valve. It mics out at 0.500, so it's a 500 boost valve. This is Transgo's boosts, or I mean their pressure regulator spring and their bumper spring. And then this is the TCC valve, the torque converter clutch valve from Sonex, with the Teflon ring at the top. And I've still got to size it, so I had to stretch the Teflon ring to get over the land to fit into the groove. And then I'm going to size this, put a little ATF on it, and I'll flip it backwards and I'll put it in the TCC bore and just leave it in there for a while, and that will actually size that Teflon ring and basically get it so that when you go and put the valve in the correct way with the bumper spring, it'll slide right in. And the whole purpose of this little Teflon ring is to keep any regulated torque converter apply pressure from leaking out past this top spool. And what'll happen is it'll leak past that top spool, and you have your torque converter clutch solenoid snout in there with an O-ring. Well, that O-ring is not going to completely keep all of the pressure from blowing out or leaking past the end spool here, so you can actually get overheating torque converters, especially in PWM models. And this is a PWM TCC valve, by the way. So if you want to regulate that pressure going to that pulse of that converter clutch, but if the valve is leaking at the top, it's not going to be regulated good enough. It's going to leak. The torque converter is not going to get the full pulse, and it's going to start overheating, and you're going to have basically issues with the torque converter clutch lining burning up, or the converter starting to blue, and then you also throw codes. So a little cheap insurance. Once this valve is installed, you never have to worry about at least this part of the valve train of the torque converter clutch apply have an issue. So anyways, that's just a little quick rundown of all this, and we're going to continue on. Okay, so the TCC valve is installed in the pump, and that's the updated Sonex TCC valve with a little Teflon ring on the top side of it and the bumper spring at the bottom. So that's all installed. And then the entire Transgo pressure regulator valve train is installed. The updated regulator valve, the Transgo bumper and pressure regulator spring, and the 500 boost valve. So this is all 100% installed and ready to put the pump half of the pump on this and align it, center it, and torque the bolts, and then the pump's all done. Okay, so we're getting ready to put the stator half of the pump on. Pretty simple to do the alignment. Quick glance, you got the two small holes here. Everything else is the bolt holes are spread far apart. So you look at this half of the pump. These two are the ones that are close. So obviously it only goes on one way. Slip it over. Bolts are ready. And start feeding them in. Well, we got the pump all torqued together. That was all torqued to spec and all 100% done. And we didn't film it, but we dummied in the gasket, slipped the pump in, put in two test bolts across from each other, set the dial indicator up, and verified the thrust of the input shaft. It came in really good, right around 22 thousandths. And when we put everything back in and torque it all up, I'll do a little bit of the indicator on the input shaft. It's very, very important that you don't run them too tight and you don't run them too loose. Like, you would not want this input shaft less than 15 thousandths back and forth play, because aluminum does expand as it heats up, and you can actually get a negative clearance if the transmission is running hot someday, and you're pulling something and it's 95 degrees outside, whatever, and your clearance goes to zero, you're burning out bearings and thrust washers and everything else. So once again, set it up right around 22, kind of middle of the road. You wouldn't want it more than 30 tops, because then you have too much back and forth play of the input shaft and the back gear train while the transmission's in operation. So anyways, we are going to move to the next step, which is putting the band in. Nothing too magical about this. Got to make sure that first off the band has been soaked, and then you work it in past the little lugs. And sometimes it is a tight fit. And sometimes they'll slide right in, and sometimes they'll fight you. You kind of push the whole drum assembly in a bit, wiggle. She will slide, she will go past that. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of work to do it. Just give it a couple little taps in there. Gentle. So we got the band in. You got to make sure it's behind the lug stop. So you can see how the little arm of the band is now tucked in and lined up for the pin apply hole. And then you got to go over on the other side and line up the receiver that this goes into. And just take the little butt end real gently, just I'm not hitting on the aluminum case, I'm tapping on the plug. And that's it. So we got the 2 Teflon rings installed on the back of the stator for the reverse input drum. Those are all ready to go. Got the gasket installed, got the seal installed and stopped at its little register. Gonna put a little bit of ATF on this seal lip all the way around, and then put the pump in, torque it to spec, and then check our input shaft play one more time, and then this is all done. Okay, so we got the pump installed. It's all torqued to 18 foot-pounds. All that's 100% done. Doing one final check of the dial indicator to see where the input shaft play is. I did a pre-input shaft play check before I put the back of the stator rings on and before I did all the gaskets and the seals. Just dummied it up to see where I was at. I had to change actually one of the selective washers underneath the bearing inside the forward drum underneath the pump, and go with a slightly thicker selective washer to get the clearance right where I am right now. So after being torqued, the play is 23 thousandths, and that is perfect for this type of straight rod transmission that's going to be running potentially slightly on the hotter side. So we'll move on to the 2/4 servo next, and then last will be the valve body. Okay, so we're ready to put the 2/4 servo in, and you want to put the rings on the proper pistons. So the green ring, depending on the kit, some are green and some are red. That goes on the 3rd accumulator piston. And then the blue goes on the outside housing. And all the kits that I've seen all have the blue ring. And then you want to put a little bit of trans gel for the little Teflon ring that's going to go in here, just to kind of hold it in place. Usually it doesn't take more than that, because you don't want it to come out as you're sliding it into the bore of the case. And then this one here is all ready to go. Just slip that on here like that. And then the same thing for your fourth piston. Just put a little bit of trans gel in. Make sure they're overlapped the right way. Very important, the tall knob goes into the cover. Don't have it flip the other way. So this goes right on like this, and then that goes on that, and then you lubricate this with some ATF. Make sure you put the spring on, put it in the bore, get the snap ring in, and then air check it through this little hole here, and make sure there's nothing hissing, and make sure that there's movement of that rod. And that's the exhaust for fourth, but you can air check it to push the entire 2-4 assembly in and verify that it's actually stroking. So there you go. I have the 2 servo installed, snap rings in place, and I just wanted to show how you air check this. Just put the air nozzle right in the exhaust bleed. And she functions and strokes and holds just fine. So she's ready for the next step. So we're putting the rear tail housing bushing in, and before we do that, we're going to go over, we took out the old speed sensor that was actually, somewhere it has a little crack in it, and it was actually had oil, ATF that was coming out the plug-in. So when we disconnected the wire harness that went to it, there was actually oil right there at the connector. So somehow this thing is leaking, and that's not good, because that means a little coil winding in the magnet now has ATF all submerged around it, and it makes the ohm resistant completely incorrect. So we ordered up a brand new, once again, AC Delco unit, brand spanking new. That'll be going in when I'm done pushing in the rear bushing and then putting in the seal. And so I'm just going to finish this here. Get it just a tiny bit below the 45 registry there. Right about there, and I'll blow it off with air, and then I'll take my little sealant and I'll put my sealant around there, and I'll press in the new seal, and then I will put the new speed sensor in, and this can be set aside and ready when we're gonna put it on the back of the transmission. Putting a little bit of my Forma gasket sealant on the little tail housing area where the seal goes in. It's kind of redundant a little bit, and some of you out there may not think it's necessary, because the new seal has that red coating on the back side of it. But sometimes these things will weep some fluid behind that new seal. So this coating is not 100%. It does a good job, but it doesn't always work. And the sealant is just a backup in case the seal was going to leak. So She is down and she will not leak. And she's not distorted because I used a bushing driver to drive it in. So moving on to the next step. So we got the 1-2 accumulator apart. Has the factory calibration springs in it. Obviously needs to be cleaned and run through the solvent. But it also has the break-prone plastic piston, which these had a plastic piston. There was also a plastic piston that was typically in the forward accumulator that's in the valve body that we haven't taken apart yet. So we're going to be upgrading it with the Transgo shift calibration springs for the 1-2 accumulator and a Transgo aluminum piston tall shank. So this shank here is taller than the plastic one, so it provides more stability for the piston itself when it's sliding up and down the pin. So just wanted to show you that really quick, and we're going to get that assembled and set to the side and then start on the valve body soon. So I put a little lubrication on the new seal we just tapped into the case, put in the range selector shaft, slipping this on here. Gotta go over here and get some of the other parts. This actually goes in like that. Put your little finger in there and pull that out of the way. Feed in one of these bolts to hold it. And get the nut on here. And this is a 15 millimeter. So I'll get that on and then snug that down real tight. And then basically you just want to push this out of the way, and then you can get that bolt right in there. But you got to hold this with your finger to get that on, and you can get that bolt right in there. And these get torqued to 20 foot-pounds. And that just gets basically snug, and then just give it another little unk, and it's done, and that part's all ready to go. Oh, by the way, don't forget to put this little clip that actually snaps on right in there after you tighten that down. Don't forget that, because otherwise this whole rooster comb and the shaft will slide back and forth. So then another little thing I do to set the adjustment of this, some guys are going to say it's not necessary, but then others say it is necessary. Before you tighten these down, you want this centered in the opening of the parking rod. And how I do that is I will take it, and let's just say it's sitting cockeyed, and so you have kind of a bindy feel to it. With the bolts being a little bit loose, you can push this in and then turn the output shaft so that the parking pawl engages the ring gear. So now it's locked, and that's actually centered right in the opening of it. And then you go in there and you just lightly tighten these up. And now this bracket is centered in relation to the arm, so it's nice and easy and smooth. So basically we line it up to where it's not engaged, turn the output shaft for it's going into park, nice and easy. So nothing too difficult, but it's just a little thing that I like to do, and it just centers up that whole mechanism in relation to the arm. So we're building the 1-2 accumulator housing, and got the ATF inside the bore, got the new aluminum piston, the rubber seal is on the piston. Gonna set up the 3 springs inside the housing. Make sure they don't bind or cross over each other. Looking good there. Yep. And drop in the bumper spring, and then this just goes right on the top. and just kind of give it some easy pressure back and forth. And there we go. Yeah, she's ready to go in. Now some people will shim this piston and shim it so they'll be top with the bore. Others will leave the springs out. Others will flip the piston around the other way. But in this situation, for this application, what we're doing, the piston's going in inverted, and then the 3 springs are being installed from the Transgo shift kit, and it's going to sit below register just a little bit, and we'll road test it and see how we like the 1-2 shift. And we may end up changing this a little bit after we road test it, but most likely this will be perfectly fine. Okay, so now we are on the valve body. We're going to be working on the separator plate first. I do need to put a new seat in for one of the check ball seats. It's not super bad and pounded out, but it's getting there, and it's not a question of if but when the ball either sticks inside it or has some other issue, and then we've got problems with third gear. So I'm going to go ahead and drill that out, and I'm going to put in a repair seat kit and its little clip that goes with it, and that'll take care of the repairs on this. All the other seats where the check ball's right against, they all look good, normal wear and tear on them, nothing super bad. And then I'm going to go ahead and start drilling out some of the holes for the shift kit and changing some of the parameters of the 1-2 and 2-3 and 3-4 shifts. So I'm going to go ahead and drill this out and then put the seat in. Then I'll take a oversized drill bit and I'll lightly give it a little chamfer on both sides, and then the seat will fit nice and tight, and then I can get the clip on no problem. So that's it, and next vid will be the seat installed. So we got the seat all repaired, got the hole drilled, got the seat installed, got the little clip on the back so the seat doesn't go anywhere, and so it has a brand new little insert. So that way, every time it does a shift from second to third, that little check ball will seal up nice and tight on that little seat. Before, it was getting pretty pounded out, and it would have leaked. It actually was leaking a tiny bit, but it would have gotten worse and worse and worse, and eventually, as you guys know, if you've done enough of these transmissions, that little check ball will pound its way through the plate and actually wedge itself and get stuck. So anyways, now we're going to start doing the shift kit mods. So I think that completes all of the shift kit mods. I'm going to double check everything, and I think that is it. All right, so here's the valve body, and we're going to start taking this thing apart. We're going to take all these valves out because this whole transmission has processed so much metal. And here's that loose solenoid that we were talking about. The other one was tight, and this one was most likely the leaker and the culprit, causing us all sorts of issues and grief, I'm sure. And oh yeah, that O-ring is all shrunk in. Big time shrunk in. So this one that's tight, let's just see how much that's sticking above the register. It's pretty flat, but it's definitely sticking above the register a little bit. whereas this one is just basically flush with it. So anyways, we're going to get this thing apart and see how things look. Okay, so we got the forward accumulator off, and spring, there's the abuse valve that it's going to be updated with the Sonics component. So this little valve and this little spring are going to go away, and we'll be updating that with the Sonics kit. And then here's the infamous plastic piston, which always breaks, and I've got the metal ones lined up for this, so it's getting a new metal piston in place of this plastic one. And amazingly, this thing's not broken yet, but sometimes they'll be broken in two, and then your forward clutches burn up. So this valve body is kind of a mess. There's a lot of metal that's gone through it, so we're going to be cleaning this thing up very thoroughly. So we're going to continue on. Well, we got the valve body all apart, ready to spray it and clean it, get all this massive sludge and metal and garbage out that's just everywhere inside this thing. And it was difficult getting some of the valves out. They were stuck in there with a lot of clutch debris and metal particles. There's the valve train all laid out. A lot of valves are being updated. The reverse and forward abuse valves are being updated. And the torque converter clutch valve inside the valve body is being updated. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be taking place. So anyways, just want to give you a little quick vid, and we're going to start cleaning. Okay, so we're drilling through the two passages here for the updated 2.3 Sonic shift valve, and you have to drill through these two passages along with the updated valve. Will keep the forward and the overrun clutches on all the time for maximum load carrying capacity for that forward sprag. And the valve, the updated valve, is this, and this replaces this valve right here. So this Sonics valve is the component that will keep both the forward and the overruns on all the time for first, second, third, and fourth. And that is a good improvement if you're going to be doing a lot of street rod or plow, tow, and haul applications. Well, I got the valve body all cleaned up. It's all sprayed out. All of the little valve bores are all cleaned, inspected with the pen light. It is thoroughly clean. Got all the metal out of it. And now we need to start cleaning the valves that are going to be reused, and then also clean the new valves that are going in, because some of them are going to have assembly oil and cosmoline and stuff on them. So we're going to clean everything thoroughly before it goes in, and then all new electrical is going in, all new solenoids and harness and all that stuff is all going on this thing. But the valve body was quite the project to clean it up. So anyways, that is the first step, and the next step is putting the valve body together. Okay, so this is the valve train layout. We have the new 3.2 downshift solenoid, new solenoid A and B, the force motor, or also called the EPC. We have the updated Sonics abuse valves and their springs. We have the updated 3.2 downshift spring. It's just a replacement spring because the 3.2 spring is really common to break. Has the updated Transgo torque converter clutch valve, and then basically we've got some updated springs that are going part of the shift kit that are going part of the force motor, and then part of the downshift spring. So the other spring, or the other valve that's very important, is the 2.3 shift valve, and that is the valve that actually helps to control and keep on the overrun clutch at the same time the forward clutch is on, so it disperses the load for the forward sprag. So that's kind of the quick rundown. We're going to start putting this thing together, and then do a little bit video later on. Oh, one other thing too is the updated piston for the forward abuse piston is this aluminum one. We got rid of all the plastic pistons, so everything is aluminum pistons for the forward, the 1, 2, and the 3, 4. So it eliminated all of the plastic and all the potential breaks that those go through. So we're going to get to it. Okay, so we got the forward piston in, and that's all lubricated and ready to go. Gonna put in the overrun valve, and then the Transgo spring that goes for that, and then the OEM stock valve, which is the OEM stock spring, which is highly recommended to just use the stock spring on these, not any kind of super stiff or super light spring, but the OEM one. So that's all ready to go. Covers ready to go on, and we'll just feed in the bolts. Get them all fed in, hold it down with the thumb, and then get them in hand tight. And these get torqued to 8 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this off camera, and we'll move on to the next step. So we got the EPC solenoid in, bracket in place, the little tang right behind the little bare foot of the solenoid, so that the solenoid is in proper location for the wire harness. And then have the 3-2 solenoid installed, and the new updated Sonex 3-2 spring. I'm sorry, not Sonex, but Transgo spring that came in here for the 3-2 valve, because these springs are really common for braking. So new spring, lubricated valve, new solenoid, correct orientation, and then moving on to the remainder, last few valves over there. So we got all the valves done on this end of the valve body, and all the springs are installed, all the clips are installed. Now we're working on the EPC. I got that valve lubricated and dropped in, and I'm making sure that all of the valves are moving freely and nothing is sticking at all. And I'll be putting the springs installed here. Make sure that goes down. There we go. Make sure everything's moving nice and free, which it is. And then the 2 springs go in, and then the plug, and then the retainer. So spring goes in, and then another spring from the Transgo kit. That was the OEM spring, by the way. The Transgo kit spring goes inside that, and then you need to push this plug in and get the retainer clip installed, and then the EPC solenoid is ready to go on, and the bolt and bracket. So we'll get that, and then we're going to move on to the last series of valves, and then pretty soon this will be done. Well, the valve body's all built, all new shift solenoids A and B, EPC, or AKA force motor, 3-2 downshift. The PWM's going in here when we put the harness in, but she is all built, all done, and ready to go in the transmission. So we're gonna move on to the next step. Okay, so we're getting ready to put the valve body on the case. We're gonna do the gaskets, obviously separator plate. Got the little check ball in the case. There's only one check ball that goes in the case. The other 7 go in the valve body. I got the 3-4 accumulator piston in, and some companies like to have the piston inverted and the spring go in first, and they bring the piston up top, and that works. But this is a me thing, that I like to put the piston in with the legs up, and then I use a stiffer accumulator spring. The factory one that came out was super light gauge steel, and you could just compress it super easy. This is a sonic spring, stiffer, and they actually hold up really well. So like I say, this is going in here, and then we're going to put the gaskets on and the separator plate and keep plugging away at it. So I got the case gasket on the transmission. That's the CA. Some of them have C depending on what year transmission you're working on. The accumulator springing in. Got the filters. Those are installed. And I'm going to put that on, and then put the other gasket on and start putting everything together. I got to put in the alignment bolts to align this, and then I can put on the hold down plate and the 3/4 accumulator, get that torqued in place, and the valve body is ready to go on. Okay, so a little addition to the video just took. I always leave out the reverse check ball in the capsule. I like the reverse to be a quicker apply. If you have the little check ball in the capsule, it has to work a little harder for the fluid to apply that piston. So I leave the capsule in the case, don't ever take that out, but I take the check ball out. And it really firms up the reverse engagement. And once again, if you're down a ravine or a steep hillside and you're trying to back out, or you're trying to pull something from the front of your truck backing in reverse, it's really nice to have that ball out. That way there's less chance of those low and reverse clutches that are right in here for starving for fluid and starting to slip. So anyways, that's just a me thing, but I just wanted to add that to the vid. So I have the gasket down that faces the valve body. I have my 3 alignment bolts in to keep the 2 gaskets and the separator plate in alignment with the case itself, so nothing cross threads or has any issues like that. I got the accumulator cover ready to go on. I'll get the bolts in place there. I have the hold down plate just loosely installed, and I'll get this cover on, and then I'll cinch these bolts down, and then the valve body's ready to go on, and it'll slip right on because everything's all aligned now. Tighten up the valve body, and I'm just going to be doing this in kind of a semicircular pattern, working from the center out. Then I'll be torquing these to spec, which is 8 foot-pounds. And we are nearing completion. All right, well, we're getting ready to put the harness now in the transmission, and I'm going to get that locked into place and then install the force motor, the EPC, and then put the 3/4 accumulator on, and then start connecting up all of the connectors for the solenoids and put the filter on, and we are just about done. So we will keep moving on.
Alrighty, wire harness is on, the force motor hooked up, PWM, got the 3/2 downshift, AB solenoids, and the shift plate. Everything's all hooked up. Up next is the trans filter and the pan and the bell housing, tail housing, and then all the shifting linkage over here for the rooster cone. So she is just about done, and I am super stoked to get this in the truck. Alrighty, tail housing is going on. Got the rear speed sensor in, the rear seals in, as well as the rear bushing, and the O-ring is about to go on here. This is what mates the tail housing to the case. Makes it a tight seal. Tail housing is on, torqued down. We did 30 foot-pounds for the mount and the bolts here for the tail housing. Up next is the pan and then bell housing. Alrighty, everything is complete. All we have left is the pan. Gasket is in place. Bell housing was torqued down to 48 foot-pounds, and then we went to 52. That's what GM specifies. Everything is complete. We are ready to finish the torque converter. So in our last clip, we had a little mess up. We ended up getting this early style transmission filter, which doesn't have the notch cut out of it like this one here. Since I am going with the factory steel pan and not a aftermarket aluminum pan, this notch is still relevant. So as you can see, the filter does not fit in that pocket there. But with this late model Wix filter, that cutout is there to form to the form of the pan. So when you guys are building these, make sure you look, because GM did a bunch of different modifications and different things to their 4L60 transmissions. So definitely make sure, if you're going with the stock pan, to get the corresponding filter that goes with that said pan. All right, the correct filter is on. About to go on. She is finally complete. Man, it is so good to see this thing on the bench. Everything's updated on it. The only thing that I didn't do is the forward drum, the input shaft, and the forward planet from Sonics. But by then it'd be $1,600 more that I'm into the transmission. But this is perfect. Got all the updates for the firm shift, valve buddies all updated, the entire gear train, pump. Oh, I am so excited to get this installed and take it for my first drive. I am going to be tuning the truck, putting a hot tune on the stock motor until obviously I pull the motor and build it. So I'm going to be doing that. I'm also going to manipulate the gearing ratio for the transmission, my shift points, and do other emissions deletes and whatnot on the truck. But then also when I get my 411 gears in the truck and my Detroit True Track posi, it's definitely going to be waking up the truck. So, oh, I am so excited. All right, well, next video will be coming out soon, and thank you guys for watching.